friends, welcome back to the Cellar Road Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about collecting wine, and we're going to dive into what that means. We're going to talk about wine collecting for the people who are just getting started or just thinking about collecting wine, and then we're also going to talk about some pointers that might be useful for those who have been collecting wine for years. So we're really excited to be here and get started. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and to get us started, I've pulled a wine out of my cellar, the 2020 GD Vajra Bricco Della Viola Barolo, that we're going to use the core event just to check in on, and let us talk about where to start collecting, how to choose what to collect, how to store things, coming up with storage, problems related to storage, why storage is important, and then trying to figure out the balance between being really excited to purchase something and to start collecting versus when you shouldn't buy something.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm going to let you corb that.
Yeah.
While we get started. So, why should people collect wine is a great question. And it can be really daunting to think about collecting wine and what that means for you. And I think for many people, the immediate assumption is that collecting wine is expensive. And it certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that's really important to talk about. So we're gonna just start with the basics and talk about why someone should even consider collecting wine and what might be the appeal of keeping wine in your house that goes beyond just opening to drink with dinner or to drink with friends.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's start with the Barolo here.
Yeah.
And just do a deep dive.
Sure.
Talk about
Let's
it.
do that. I love that.
Yeah. So Barolo is one of my first go-to collecting wines just because it is almost a fail-safe wine when it comes to collecting. You really can't go wrong with it. It's ageable. And yeah, it's always a wine that could take time and some age. So this 2020 Vajra here is super, super, super young.
Very young.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Barolos, they're produced with the intent that you are aging them.
Yes.
And, people joke that the other Italian reds are the wines that Italians drink while they wait for their Barolos to age. Because Barolos are meant to be sat down for a long time.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's, just because of the composition of the grape and the way that the wine is produced.
Correct.
So a little bit about Vajra. It's a relatively young producer for Barolo. I mean, as you can imagine, they've been making wine in Italy for a while now. Mm-hmm. Vajra isn't as old as some of the other producers, but we think that it's one of the best.
Yeah.
And Bricco della Viola is a beautiful hill, the Hill of Violets, Bricco della Viola. Beautiful hill, one of the highest elevations that Barolo's grown on.
Yeah, I think it
Piedmont.
might be the highest.
Yeah. So this is a singular location owned by the Vajras. This is a family-owned winery, which is a fun thing. I appreciate that about the wine. Yeah. And so, Anna, what are we checking for here? You brought this out of your cellar. For Barolo, a 2020 is super young.
Yeah.
You really shouldn't be thinking about a Barolo.
We should not be doing this
right now. That's less than 10 years old.
Yeah.
What are we checking on?
Yeah. So we're just kind of checking in with the basic structure of the wine. How is it looking? Tannins, acid, flavor profiles. This is still a really young wine. And even though Barolos legally have to meet certain classifications and be aged so long in barrel and so long in bottle before they are released, this is a wine that's still going to be incredibly young. So in terms of aroma and flavor profiles, we're probably only going to see those primary fruit notes with some secondary coming from barrel.
Sure.
But it still should be really bright, vibrant fruit. And I almost imagine that it is going to be out of balance in terms of acid and tannins. It's not
something's
fully... Something's going to be a little bit off and out, in which only time and oxygen can pull it into balance.
Sure. And so talk to me about why you used the Corbin and what that allows us to do with this wine.
Yeah, so oxygen is the thing we are combating when we are aging a wine. Oxygen is both necessary and the greatest evil to anything.
Very true.
Yeah. So the second I open this bottle, like officially pull the cork out, all of this stuff, it is going to immediately jumpstart the aging process on the wine. Because what oxygen is going to come in, it's going to polymerize the tannins, and it's just going to immediately...
It's going to start to unravel.
It's going to start to unravel, and it's going to... That also along with the acid. And it's going to prematurely age the wine, but also turn it bad.
Sure.
All wine wants to turn into oxygen.
It just wants to be vinegar at the end of the day.
All wine wants to be vinegar.
Yeah.
And so what the Corvin allows us to do is that it allows us to only make a tiny little like incision with a medical grade needle into the bottle. So we're not really piercing the cork. Cork is porous to begin with, so oxygen's getting in there.
And it seals right back up after that needle leaves.
Yep. Right. And so then it is just touching into it so we can observe it. But one thing to note with the Corvin is that in corvining a wine, I'm still accelerating the aging process, and this is because you can see like the total
the mass is going down inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so there's more oxygen.
There's more oxygen in the bottle, which is then still going to age the bottle.
Yep.
But it does allow me to check in on this specific bottling.
Right.
So not just this one bottle, but the specific bottling. So this specific producer, the specific vintage, and just to see where it's at in the aging process at this given point to help me determine how much longer it needs to be aged or if it's ready to go. Right.
Well, and obviously we poured nice hefty glasses because we're going to talk through what we're looking at and the profile of this wine. Ideally, you're just pouring enough so that you can make sure that nothing is tasting off on the wine and that it seems that it's not progressing in the wrong direction or that it's, or, occasionally you're going to test a wine and it's going to be ready. So you're going to pop that cork right now.
100%.
So we're pouring. We poured a little more, but ideally, to your point, you want as little oxygen in that bottle as possible. Correct. So when you're testing your wine, if you're using the Corvin, just get enough out that you can really get it on your palate, in your nose, and make sure that it's aging well. Some warning signs to look out for if you are Corvining your wine. First and foremost, if you notice that when you're putting the Corvin through the cork, the cork's integrity is changing or it's moving up and down the neck, that's going to be a no-go. That means that cork's integrity is probably faulted.
And that means that your wine
is not going to be good.
Corked.
Unfortunately, your wine is corked. And sometimes you can, depending on when you purchased it and if you remember where you got it, you can take it to the shop that you purchased it at. Always shop local. Take it to your local wine shop that you bought the wine at and say, hey, there's an integrity issue with this wine. And typically they'll work with you to fix that. Another thing, even if you get through the cork and everything's fine, if you take it up to your nose and you immediately smell cardboard or wet dog or if it smells super
cheesy,
earthy, cheesy, vinegary, you'll know. If it is off-putting, the wine is probably bad. And that happens. 1 in 12 bottles of wine across the industry. Obviously, that doesn't mean that if you have a case of wine in your cellar, one of them is bad. It just means across the industry, 1 in 12 bottles has a fault. So you're going to run into it, especially if you start to collect wine. So just know what to look out for when you're tasting and testing your wines. So let's get into this. Oh, yeah. That's nice. Even for how young it is, this wine is beautiful. So I think a misnomer about red wines that are ageable or that are made to be aged is that they have to be huge. What I love about Barolo is it's not.
No. Barolo
is such a beautiful wine, and when aged appropriately, it's delicate on the palate, and it's it's not quite as light as a Burgundian Pinot, but it's really good. And it's certainly not heavy, but that's one of those things, one of those indicators, right? If a Barolo is still really tannic, not ready.
No. Nebbiolo, the grape of Barolo, is an incredibly tannic wine to begin with, and this is why it often needs time and oxygen, and why it is such an age-worthy and a cellarable wine or grape in general, is because it's so tannic. Is that it's so tannic that the only thing that is actually going to bring those tannins into balance is time.
Yes.
Time and introduction to oxygen.
Yeah, and you know the resolution of the tannins. So when the tannins are fully unfolded and polymerized, they're considered resolved. So if you hear a sommelier say the tannins are resolved, it just means that wine is aged appropriately.
Yeah.
But you know, if those tannins are not resolved, they're going to be gritty on your palate. You're going to feel it in the back of your mouth, on the like back here in your cheeks, and you know, you might feel like your tongue could get scraped off. Right? Those are the things that tell you.
Correct. It's like this is also building on.
Oh yeah.
Like,
So those tannins are just right there. They're just right there
very
for you.
present.
Oh yes.
Grippy.
Yep. Sandpaper.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Not bad.
Not bad.
Just sandpaper.
You can tell this is a nice wine, and we'll see how it opens up and spends time in the glass, and as we swirl it and continue just to introduce oxygen to it, how it evolves over the course of this recording this episode.
Right.
But
so as we'll keep talking about this wine as we go. So thinking about like how you choose the wines you want to collect, right?
Yeah.
So we just talked a lot about Nebbiolo, the grape, what the type of wine it produces, especially from Barolo.
Yeah.
That makes this a great wine to collect.
Correct.
Because it's producing a wine that's acidic, high in tannin.
Yep.
Those two components make this wine ageable.
Correct.
But what other considerations do you think are important for aging a wine?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about it in our last episode, which is that part of going through the process of aging a wine and trying to decide to age a wine is that you have a reason to want to go down this process and take the risk to do it. So why do I have Barolo? Well, it was one of my first real introductions into wine when I started like truly exploring wine beyond just it being fascinating. Is that everybody's like, oh, have you heard of Barolo? And I'm like, what is Barolo?
Yeah.
I mean, like, oh, it is a sub-region in the Piedmont in Italy, and all this connection, and it being, you know, like considered like the wine of kings and all this other stuff.
Right.
And was just truly introduced to it. And then I got the pleasure to meet Francesca Vajra, who is one of the now owners. Love that. Yeah, one of the now owners, and had an amazing conversation with her. And so I always get really excited when Vajra puts out a new release, especially of the Bricco Della Viola Barolo, which is their flagship wine. And so that's how like this wine in particular has made its way into my cellar, and why I am spending the time to cellar it, to age it, to take it down this journey to become the beautiful wine I know it can become, to unlock its potential.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head with the fact that like you can certainly cellar wines because you know that this wine comes from Napa and it's a strong producer and it's a well-produced wine, and you can buy that wine and put it in your cellar. But I just can't. For me at least, it's hard to understand why you would do that if you don't have a personal connection. If you don't like Napa, but you have Napa Cab in your cellar, I don't understand why.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly for entertaining purposes, but you know, your cellar should really reflect who you are. And if Napa Cab doesn't speak to you, don't keep Napa Cab in your cellar. You know, unless you've got that one friend that you know is going to be at your house and enjoys a good, you know, 2008. Oakville Cabernet Sauvignon, then by all means have that for your friend. But you know, my cellar does have Napa Cab in it because I love Napa, and I love Cabernet Sauvignon, and so and I appreciate the history in Napa, and I have some familial connections to that region. So Napa's all over my cellar. Bricco's in my cellar. You know, so Champagne is in my cellar. We've got some vintage wines from Champagne that are just gonna sit there and keep doing their thing. But your cellar should really tell your story.
Completely. So, and that kind of goes into starting to begin your collection, which is truly just, if you are interested in collecting wine, I would start with asking why you want to collect wine. Is there a wine in particular that you have truly connected with, or a region or a producer who you've truly started to connect with, and start to explore that connection and then build out from there?
Right.
Which is, like in my cellar, there's a ton of Mosel Valley Riesling. And this is because I love the Mosel. But it's also
and you sprach the Deutsch.
So. Und ich spreche Deutsch, ja. Ich spreche the Deutsch. Ich spreche Deutsch. Is that, there's a family connection going back to Germany, but it's also in Germany that I truly became interested in wine.
Right.
And the thing that truly started this journey for me. So I have that. I have a ton of champagne. I have some wines from Michigan, my home state, which actually produces some incredible wine if you know where to go. That's totally age worthy. Like I have some 2005s that are nowhere near ready to be open.
Yeah.
And I have some really cool like Barolos, some Brunellos, Burgundy.
Yeah.
Of course there's Burgundy.
Yes, Burgundy. As we just in our last episode discussed and enjoyed some wonderful Ambro. So to give some basic pointers on if you want to start collecting wine, what do you need to do? It depends on how much you want to spend, and at the end of the day, it just comes down to the dollar. And so you can cellar wines that are not expensive. I think that's an important thing to say. Like there are plenty of $50, $40, $35 bottles of wine that can age for 10 plus years.
Correct.
Totally. Now they're not going to come from some of the premier wine growing regions in the world. You're not probably going to be aging a $35 Napa.
Probably not.
I don't think that wine is produced. Right. I don't think that wine is produced to age. I think that wine is mass produced to drink quickly. But you certainly can find some of those wines in some of the lesser known regions of the New World.
Like the Coonawarra in Australia is one of my favorite wine producing regions, and you can find some killer Cabernet, particularly some killer Cabernet Sauvignon coming out of that region.
Right.
That's not that expensive. That's going to fall between the $50 to $70 price range.
Exactly. And if you're looking for ageable white wine, you can find some delicious Chenin Blanc, which is a thick-skinned white grape. It produces a really rich and kind of honeyed fruit, beautiful wine, and you can find some great Chenins coming out of the Stellenbosch region in South Africa. Particularly Kiermont is a producer that has some fabulous single vineyard Chenin Blancs that are $40. And you can those can age
a killer wine
for a while. So you can certainly find some great wines that will age in those lesser regions or in those less expensive regions. Another really fun region or part of the world, Spain, produces wine, and the whole Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal produce wines that can go forever. And what's great about those wines is they're beautiful to drink young, but they can take the age. And Riojas, Tempranillo is not an expensive grape to purchase, so you can find some lovely Riojas that aren't expensive and technically old world wines. So you can do that. So what you're looking for, if you're starting, our recommendation is always start your collection with things that aren't too expensive. A, you're going to get excited and drink it. B, you always want to give yourself the benefit of the doubt and buying wines that aren't going to make you feel guilty if something goes wrong, if the storage doesn't work the right way, or you taste the wine and it has faulted. You don't want that heartbreak you don't want that heartbreak coupled with a $500 loss.
No, and I think that also comes into thinking about so you've decided you wanted to collect wine, like how do we now actually go about the process of collecting wine? And I always feel like the first place is starting with the budget. How much are you willing to spend on wine?
Right.
And then asking yourself the question as like, oh, if I like it, should I just buy it?
Right. Like my wife and I, we have literally set a monthly budget of wine that we are going to drink, like wine that we're going to buy to drink,
Yes.
and wine
Yeah.
that we are going to buy to cellar.
Yes.
And so we go over it.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
We go over our budget.
Those listening at home, don't do that.
Don't recommend it. But we try to stick to that, and that gives us the opportunity to pretty much guilt-free go fulfill that. And sometimes that budget is taken by 3 bottles of wine or 2 bottles of wine.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a case, right? It just depends on the wine. Are we buying a Tempranillo or are we buying a Burgundy?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that also comes down to then like knowing when do you spend like your entire budget on perhaps a singular bottle.
Right. And that goes back to the rating system. I mean, we're hoping that the rating system we developed will help you identify those moments.
Correct.
Right. It's knowing when it's time to say, okay, well, my monthly budget for wine is $300, but this 2008 champagne is a 5-star wine. I'm going to get 2 bottles of that, and then get something else nice for myself. It's to know that it's like, okay, this time. This is the wine I'm going to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also then think a lot of it has to do with reflecting on our personal story with wine. So there are times where it's like, I taste a lot of wines every single week.
Right.
I've tasted some incredible wines, but a lot of Napa, for some reason, like Napa cabs are always pushed on me. And I've tasted a lot of really, really great Napa cabs.
Yeah.
And like I have 1 or 2 in my cellars,
Sure.
but they're really not my style. I'm not like a New World red kind of girl, with the exception of like 1 bottle that I'm thinking of in particular, which is the Kiermont Cab Sauv, which I adore.
Right.
But I prefer like cooler climates wines in general.
Yeah.
So the question is like, when am I going to spend $200 or $300 perhaps on a single bottle?
Yeah.
So like the en gros, that's like almost no question for me.
Yeah.
If that wine is available, which it was, and it's like, okay, I love Burgundy. I love Pinot Noir. I like the really good Burgundies. I am very rarely ever going to spend like less than $100 on a bottle of Burgundy, because
you're not going. I mean,
I'm
you're just
not going to. I'm just not
now
going
you can
to.
buy Louis Jadot.
Yeah.
If you're buying Burgundy and need a bottle of wine that's not above $75, which is about your entry point otherwise, the Louis Jadot, kind of just the standard Burgundy label.
Yeah.
Delicious. Cannot go wrong.
Correct.
Louis Jadot also has village-specific labels, and those bottles go up to $300, $600.
Yep.
But you can certainly buy the $34 Village.
Yeah.
It's just a Bordeaux red blend, but they're fabulous. And Louis Jadot's has connections to Bordeaux or Burgundy that give that producer exclusive access to some of the most coveted rows of grapes in the region. So, we have a bottle of JD Vajra on the table right now, but go buy Louis Jadot. It's really good. Let's say you're starting to collect wine. You've decided you're going to do it, and you now have a cardboard box of wine in your house or your apartment, and you're like, okay, what do I do with this thing?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. You do not need to have an expensive solution to how to store your wine. Period.
No.
There are 2 things you need.
Yeah.
Cold and dark.
Cold and dark. Yeah. Those
Ideally
are the most
a little humid, but cold and dark.
Cold and dark is the most essential.
Right.
And this is because when we are thinking about aging a wine, we are fighting time. And we're trying to hope that everything goes right over the course of time. Aging wine is always a risk because anything can go wrong in the aging process.
Right.
And so like we mentioned before, like with this wine, the only thing that's going to like really age it and bring it into its full potential is time, because that allows oxygen to get access to it. And so when we are thinking about cellaring a wine, and we like storage is almost the thing we should be thinking about before we start the process of collecting wine.
Yep.
For many, 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 many years, my storage solution was like hidden in my closet with all of the bottles stored in their case or in a case, upside down. So that one, sunlight wasn't being introduced to it, because that can also like mess with the bottle and cause things to go wrong. And then upside down, so that the cork inside was constantly in contact with the liquid inside, keeping it wet to make sure that the cork would constantly stay expanded and it wouldn't dry out and shrink, which would then again fault the wine, accelerate the aging process, and have something go bad.
Yeah, I mean, my very sophisticated wine cellar at home right now is our HVAC closet.
Love
so
that.
Our wine sits next to the air conditioner.
Yeah.
And it does great in there. There's no problem. We have a wine fridge, but that's pretty much just the champagne fridge. But our reds age next to the HVAC. So and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, you certainly can install large wine fridges in your home, or install a custom built wine cellar. You can do offsite storage. You can have a temperature controlled warehouse if you really want to. We know a couple people who own enough wine that it makes sense for them to have
bottles.
That it makes sense for them to have their own warehouse, which, I mean, more power to them.
Yeah, more power to him. I know. He was just like going through the process of moving it all, and it took him weeks.
No thanks.
Weeks.
No thanks.
To categorize and catalog everything, and then get it moved while the temperature wasn't too high.
Yep. So be judicious with, if you're just starting out, be judicious with your expense.
Yes.
Don't overcommit.
Yes.
And have a storage solution ready. If you don't right now, if you're like, well, I have 24 bottles of wine in my house right now and no storage solution. Okay, we just gave you some tips. Cold and dark. That's all you need. Find a closet, put it in there.
Correct.
Let's revisit this wine, because it's been in our glass now for a few minutes, and I'm certain that it's developed a little bit.
I mean, you can already tell it on the nose that it doesn't come off as tight, and those fruit characteristics are really starting to come out that weren't there initially. So like all the cherry and raspberry, it's not as like floral immediately on the nose.
Yeah, that's delicious. I mean, I will say, you certainly can drink wine like this young. You leave it out. You put it in a decanter, cover it with cheesecloth, let it sit for 24 hours and drink it. There is something about prematurely aging a wine and drinking it young when it's not supposed to be, that like you're just not going to get the full experience. You're not going to get those secondary flavor profiles and tertiary flavor profiles. The tannins, they'll be resolved, but it's almost like there's an artificiality to the resolution. It doesn't feel the same. And on the palate, it doesn't feel the same. So like this wine is opening and it is gorgeous. But you can tell that it's opening because we've introduced it to oxygen, not because it has reached its aging.
It's not had time. And like one thing to think about it is that what's happening in the bottle is that it's essentially marinating. So think of it as, it is stewing. All the flavors and everything are coming together, and we can speed that up. So I love cassoulet. I hate the process of making cassoulet because it is like 3 days and it's absolutely miserable. But I will do it because it's beautiful. And I have friends who are like, I have a 1-day fast track to do this. And I've also done that. It's nowhere near as good. It's nowhere near as good. It's delicious still because it's cassoulet.
Yeah, but it's not as good.
It's not as good. Right. And like this is also part of it. There is something beautiful about taking the time to age the wine and to age it properly. Which is, again, all you need is cold and dark for certain. All you need is cold and dark. Something about taking the time and dedicating the time and the resources to pulling essentially what is a bottle of liquid history that's filled with stories. It has a story before it gets to you.
Right.
And the process of you aging it is just another one, is part of the story. And then when you can pull a bottle of wine that's been in your cellar for 20 years, and like, oh, it's now finally time to drink this. It's beautiful, both when it works and when it doesn't work.
Right, that's right. So that's the penultimate question, right? That's other than why would I age wine in the first place is, okay, when do I drink it, right?
Yes.
And so there's ways to know.
There are ways to know.
The first and the easiest is to just look at vintage trackers.
Yes.
They're available everywhere, like wine is written about.
Yeah.
You can see, okay, if I have a 1998 Burgundy from this village, that will be ready in between 2025 and 2040, right? Or if I have a 2004 Rioja, that's ready to drink now.
Yep.
So just find a vintage tracker.
Yep.
If you don't want to find a vintage tracker and you want to do it the hard way, okay, great. We can do it the hard way. Buy a Corvin, take a little out of your bottle, smell, taste. If it's not grippy, if it's delicate and kind of floats over your palate.
Yep, and the tertiary notes
you're
have
getting
finally
notes of-
developed. We've got
yes.
baked fruit
Right.
and the chocolate and butterscotch and caramel.
Leather,
and,
depending on
Yeah.
the wine, leather and smoke.
all
and
of these notes that only come from time and age.
That's right.
Then we're getting into the process in which the wine is ready.
It's ready to go.
Yeah.
Yep. If you open your wine or you Corvin your wine and you smell wet cardboard and dirty dog and cheese, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
And that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes. Not every bottle
That's
is
the adventure.
perfect. Yeah,
That's
that's
right.
part of the adventure. It's part of the road.
It is
Yeah.
part of the road.
It is part of the road. Of taking it out and hoping that everything goes right because, like we said, wine just wants to turn into vinegar. All wine wants to do is become vinegar.
That's right. That's right. Well, I don't think we need to rate this wine. It's not ready for it. I mean, I think this will be a beautiful wine in 10 years or longer. I think it's got the legs for it. This will be a 5-star wine. Right now, it's not ready.
Well, I think we should rate it because then, how do we know what wines we're going to pick to cellar? Yeah.
Okay. Let's just pause for a second.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and rate this wine.
Yeah, let's go through and rate this wine.
I need a little more, but I'm not going to get it because I want to keep it in there.
We can go through and rate it. One,
it's so good.
It's a
Can't stop
well-made
drinking.
wine.
Yes.
We don't even
100%
need to
well constructed.
Yeah,
The ageability is not a question.
yeah. The ageability. It's notable. It is
Certainly.
a single variety. It's a single vineyard.
Single vineyard.
Varietal.
Barolo. Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
Barolo,
Nebula.
single vineyard. But yeah, it is a single vineyard Barolo. And so it's rare. There is notability to it.
Yeah.
They don't make that much.
Do they produce Bricco every year? I don't think they do.
I don't think they do. I don't believe they do. They only produce it in the good vintages.
Yeah. Good for them.
Yes. Wonderful for them.
Better for us because
Exactly.
if you see it on the shelf,
Yeah.
you know that wine needs to be in your. If you like Italian reds,
Yeah.
you need to put that in your cellar.
Yes, completely.
Yeah.
And then the last one is worth the price point.
Yeah. And so what is this
This
running?
one's between 100 to 110.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I mean, depending on your particular flavor,
Yeah.
if you really love Italian red, buy it.
Yeah. And
If you don't really love Italian red, then it's a judgment call.
Yeah,
Right?
and even for Barolo, I find the $100 price point for a wine of this quality to be accessible for moving into this quality of wine.
Yeah.
Again, this isn't saying if you don't have the money, you don't have the budget for it, don't go out and
Don't
buy
buy
it.
it,
Don't
right.
buy it. But
Yeah.
on the 5-star scale, this is clearly
A 5-star.
a 5-star wine, which makes it just beautiful, truly, truly
A
beautiful.
lovely one. Great. Well, we will put this Barolo back on the shelf and revisit it again soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
So
Until next time.
until next time.
Cheers.